Student Action. Welcome, everybody. This is PnP Weekly. It is episode 89, and it is 29th of June, 2020. We are past the midsummer, and it is less than 6 months to Christmas.
Yes, it's the third month of March.
Yeah. That is actually true. Winter is coming. Get ready for it. But so on the PnP Weekly, we talk about the latest on Microsoft 365 platform, focusing maybe more on the dev side, but we also have non-dev topics discussed here. And this week we do have a visitor. Before we go there, my name is Vesa Juvonen. I'm a program manager from the OneDrive SharePoint platform team, and with me as a co-host, Waldek. Who are you?
Hi, everybody. My name is Waldek Mastykarz. I am head of product at Rencore, and today we have a guest from the, I don't actually know, sunny, rainy UK, newly nominated Office Dev MVP, Mr. Paul Bullock.
Yay.
Hi, Paul. How you doing?
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm good. I'm very good. Very happy to be here. So, so I'm Paul Bullock. I'm SharePoint Architect at CaPa Creative. So I'm a contractor within the UK, working with a variety of local government organisations, healthcare, central government, that kind of thing. So yeah, a wide variety of stuff. Yeah.
And pretty recently you got your MVP as well. That was like in March or something like that.
Yeah, I was really surprised actually.
Second month of March, first month of March. It was March.
But on okay, well, like, shut up. Now,
that's the first one.
that is the first one, actually. So, but it's Monday, so you know, it's always Monday when we do these things. But anyway, so Paul, you've been doing a lot of open source and contributions before you get your MVP as well. So can you talk about the work what you've done and contributed for the community design?
Yeah, so majority of the contributions are focused around the PnP modernization tooling, page transformation. So the tooling actually splits into two parts. You've got the modernization tooling, and you've got the page transformation, which takes content from a source system, so a classic source system, and converts it over to modern. I've been working quite closely with Bert Jansen, who's been an awesome guy to work with on this project to bring that forward. And this whole thing, my contribution actually stemmed from a project at work where I had a client who had a SharePoint 2010 intranet who wanted to go or steered towards modern SharePoint. They had a lot of headaches regarding maintaining the platform and keeping the customizations up to date. And I said, let's go modern. Taking that forward, I also separately contributed towards the modernization tooling in introducing enough of the key features to achieve a publishing site transformation to the modern experience. And that was quite a journey as well, because that was also my first time I contributed on a significant level. So it was trying to find the right entry point into the community to start. So this predates a lot of the hard work that David Warner and Hugo Benier has done with the introductory programs they have. Yes, indeed, which I think is an awesome idea. And when I started seeing that, I think, that would have made things a lot more smooth. Well, it's you see these guys who are contributing these repos regularly. There's a lot of Twitter traffic. You think, where do I start? Where do I start with this?
Right.
But I also found that my own contribution rhythm sort of aligned with what I do at work, and by keeping that close, I found a project that was very close to what I was trying to do, which was the modernization tooling. So the entry point was actually a PR. A very small one, because I wanted to actually test the waters. I didn't know the owner, and I wanted to see what the process was. So I was still learning GitHub at that time, in terms of the PR process and stuff like that. I've been using TFS for years and sort of shifting that mentality over. And so I fired this PR over to Bert, which was a simple thing, was to essentially transform from one site collection to another. So at that time, the tooling was just within the same site collection.
Yeah.
And I introduced that, and from there we started developing a dialogue through the issues list and some Teams calls and things like that to understand the best way of working forward. So we've done for each of the features that I've worked on to communicate out what was in my head. I ended doing a lot of like mini designs within the issues, and then he would feed back onto it, and then we would end up in a direction. Similarly, as well, as I was developing the sections of the modernization tool that I've worked on, I would then face a scenario at work with using that, and then I would feed that back, and then we would take that forward. So, for example, publishing pages, support for publishing pages came in. We had a lot of challenges around what do we do with page layouts and things like that. Do we just take the concept? Do we try and work out how the layouts are formed? And in the end, we went down the content web part route, because obviously with custom intranets you get a lot of CSS and JavaScript that move things around on the screen, so it's very difficult to extract out where the target locations would be in the modern site. So essentially it was more about the content moving that over to the modern experience.
But I guess so. I think like the experience you mentioned, I think that is a typical, if not even the best way to contribute, right? Because like you have a real use case, like a real life use case from the field for something that people truly need. Well, so and if you need that, well, the odds are high that somebody else will need it too. So why not contribute? Like solve the issue once, and let everybody else use that, as opposed to have everybody reinvent the wheel and try to solve the same problem in another way, right?
But again, Waldek, on that one, let's get back on Paul's discussion in a second. But again, on that one, you might be the devil's advocate saying, yeah, but if you build the code, then that's your IP. Why would you actually share that to open source? I'm going to derail this discussion.
Oh, yeah, so I know why, but Paul, yes. So why would you share that? Are you crazy?
What I did instead is because I was speaking to my client, and it was potentially a high-risk thing within the project to go, look, there is no tool on the market to do this modernization. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my spare time, and I bear the risk in terms of time. And it also gives me the opportunity to contribute back to the community, which I have personally used a lot of PnP PowerShell quite heavily, and samples and things like that. And it was really good to be able to say, do you know what, I'll do this in my spare time. It's totally worth the effort. And if it doesn't work, there is a fallback route. It's horrible. It's manual copy and pasting. And I'd even have to...
Two browsers, left and right, from two.
Yeah. I would even have to actually code that in, because when we tried copy and pasting from classic to mod, it included like the depth of tables as well, because it was one of those based structures. And so I thought, wow, this is going to be painful for manual. I've got to say to these guys,
I need to fix it.
I do. And I didn't really anticipate that the work that I'll be doing on the actual community contribution would take off the way it has. So I mean, I in the work that I did, I represent probably about 10,000 transformations. So that's peaking at 750,000. That's pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's coming back on the just to clarify on also what the I would say the Uber capability there is, which where you contributed a lot, is that from on-premises SharePoint 2010 publishing site, you run the transformation tool, which creates the same site to SharePoint Online with the same content.
The same pages, the same content.
Same page and content, and that's like, wow, that's really, really cool. We should have that out of the box, but we don't for now, at least. So
I mean, there are only so many things you can do, right? And I mean, on the other hand, despite your size and everything that people think, Microsoft does not have unlimited resources to do everything and anything, especially if you think about a product that has been around for almost 20 years, right? There are so many different things, like your team would have to be massive to support all of that, right? So instead, you just choose the things that only you can do, and whatever you cannot do, whatever does not fit, well, community is there to help you out. So I think that is a perfect mix, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a good fallback position as well. Yeah.
And good clarification actually also how to get involved on the community. Like you said, in whenever you started, the Sharing is Caring initiative run by David and Hugo didn't exist. That's a really great tool, by the way, for learning how to get started. But then it's really around the fact that finding the area which is interesting, and then finding the project owner, starting discussion, starting contributing, and then it can start. It's a kind of a rolling, what is it? Snowball
effect. Yeah.
Starts growing and growing as it comes down the hill, right?
Regarding your previous point, so I'm just catching up.
No, okay.
It's all right. Brain
connection is slow.
So the reason why I focused on getting the on-prem directly to SharePoint Online is because when I was actually, I got a couple of blog posts that describe the strategy in which to get an on-premise to online. And when I was writing my first one, which was essentially use a migration tool to hop up a copy of the 2010 into SharePoint Online, fix its visual issues, or at least enough of it for you to use the UI, and then move it out, then run the modernization tooling against it over to modern. And that hopping was very expensive in time. I thought that's got a less painful way. I mean, it's on premise. I know that the PnP PowerShell can connect to older versions of SharePoint. So 2013, I think, it goes back to in terms of support. Let's see if we can push it slightly further back. It's only the modernization tooling that supports that, and every command around it may break because of the lack of CSOM properties and methods and things back in that version. So it's actually I've Waldek to partly thank on that because it was your blog.
What did I do?
You're plotting. Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah.
yeah. I think I might have tweeted about which articles a year ago that I actually used that was a key point in enabling that capability. But essentially what I had to do was with the CSOM gaps, I had to fall back on web services. And strangely enough, I'd not really developed any sort of solutions around the web service. So I had to learn it to enable that sort of get the gaps in the CSOM API just enough to move that forward. And that was it was the blog post that was one of the contributing factors.
That is like going way back, right? Because you're talking now about the SOAP ASMX services, right?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
Which are there since 2007. Like, wow, that is time machine.
which are highly deprecated. Don't use them.
I mean, nowadays with everything that we have available now, I don't think that there is really a valid need. Maybe for a very specific niche thing, like if you really insist on, I need to do that, and I need to do it in this particular way, which is, by the way, exposed only by this one thing. Like, but in reality, I don't think that there is any valid case for any of that anymore.
No, I certainly wouldn't do it in SharePoint Online, but when you're working with the older technology stack, you use the older methods, don't you? So,
that was the only way to get access on the list data and base data.
Really
detailed level. Yeah, exactly.
It was like the little things like determining a site's URL actually that was little properties. We think that's really useful, and it's missing from 2010. I can see that they obviously found that and added it. It was.
But I mean, if you go back 10 years, the reality back then was very much you would run your code on server, and you would use the server-side OM to access, and you would have access to virtually anything you wanted. Like whether you wanted to access this or that, like you would access the API directly. There was no need to run remote code because why? Like nobody did it then.
True.
This is not the case anymore. These dinos are dead now.
Why are we always talking about this dinosaur stuff? So,
of course, it's not dead yet. Actually, 2010's been extended until April next year. So, I probably will follow up with some additional blog posts,
which is in three months, right? There will be September, December, and April.
Yeah. What?
I mean, we just had 3 months of March.
Okay. Okay.
On the bombshell.
And that's it. Everything we're going to do this week. Bye-bye. But yeah, obviously the on-premises is still a big thing. As an example, when we released the .NET Standard version of SharePoint CSAM last week, and there was a lot of feedback, and we know this feedback, and that people were saying, why isn't it for SharePoint 2019 either? Obviously, the majority of people hopefully are already at the cloud, but there is a big portion of people who are still forced to work in on-premises, even in 2010 or 2013, 2016, 2019 version. SharePoint was really one of the key reasons why the Office 365 has been so successful was actually the fact that SharePoint was so successful in on-premises, because that was the first thing what people moved over right after email. Email was the logical one, obviously, but still. So.
But one thing I do see actually with the on-premises stuff, part of what I do is to get people onto 365. So it's partly around onboarding, migrations, that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of poorly looked after farms that I encounter that just don't. People just treat it as a service. So that you spin up boxes, you throw it. It's a service to people to use, but they don't think about the infrastructure behind it. It's amazing actually how much SharePoint is resilient on a server side. So things could be alarming bells with the red health alerts in the admin center. No, the central admin center. You could say I've been doing on premise for for a while now, and the thing still runs.
ADM.
It's like, do you know your farm's about to fall over, right? I'm like, it's fine.
No, it works just fine.
but that is absolutely one of the key reasons why the cloud is the recommended way, because somebody else is taking care of all of that, and there's an SLA for it, and there's a known costs. Because I still remember when I used to do on-premises actual projects and writing code and all of that stuff, it never ever the projects was delivered on time with the budget it was given. It was just never.
Hold on. So you said that
was it
back in the days when I was just about to say that. Like back in the days when I was doing projects and writing code, projects were never on time. Like. So it's a good thing you moved that, right?
No, but it's the fact that it's so hard to estimate the costs and operations, and then whenever there was a CU update or a service pack update, you ended up doing the CU update during weekend so that you minimize the downside, which basically then meant that on Sunday, so like Saturday 4 p.m. you're like, I have a date coming up. I have
barbecue is on. Barbecue is on.
Crossing fingers. Come on, work.
No, but I think that is the whole thing. Like, people underestimate how complex thing it is to operate, right? And so it is one, right? I mean, if your experience is, let's say, IIS, well, you patch it and it runs or not. Like, there's nothing much you can do about that. SharePoint is very much not the case, right? Plus, whatever update you do, it might have impact on whatever you have built, because as we know, there are 20 million ways to build things. And back in the days, let's say we had more partisan approaches to building things. Let's put this thing there, let's take dependency on this div there. Well, then you update and the div is in there and your things break and you're like, what's wrong, right? So I think that also added to this total cost of ownership of a farm, right? And it was, as you say, impossible to estimate, because as your internet grows, well, there are 20 million extension points all over it, and nobody has really way to keep track of all of that.
Sure.
Hence, going to the cloud.
And we supported script editor web parts where people were able to kill themselves and site collections and the site designer.
DOM injection, not to mention customizing master pages and page layouts.
Designer, you went there, you modified the page, and then everything looks fine for 1 month, and then the second month it doesn't.
Things like HTTP handlers, HTTP modules.
That's good as well. But then at the same time, it's funny, now we talk about the dinosaur language again. The first step when we go to the cloud used to be, luckily it's now no longer that, was the IIS, Information as a Service, Architecture as a Service, IISS, what is it? IaaS, Information Architecture as a Service. You buy a VM, virtual machine from the cloud, and then you run the pronunciation. I know. But you basically run the infrastructure as a service. Thank you.
Yes. What?
But again, that did not change the way of operation, and it didn't actually remove the problem. It's the same thing. The underlying part, the software isn't on your responsibility, but everything else is. So the operations is still there. Now, at the same time, you might even argue that if you're using just pure Azure services, you still have more things to manage and operate comparing to the of Microsoft 365, because Microsoft 365 is taking care of
absolutely. Well, but I mean, so with IaaS, you don't get energy bill.
True.
Network bill, maybe not, depending how things work. But like for everything else, it's exactly that. It's a box that is in somebody else's cloud, and then whatever you put on there, that's on you. Whether you install their Notepad or SharePoint, like that's on you. You manage that.
Yep.
So like it's not really a win.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a skill shift with on-prem versus online as well. So with on-prem, it was not just about SharePoint, but it was about the SQL servers, the network, DNS, all of that peripheral stuff. And there's a lot of it, and SharePoint does integrate quite deeply with those components, and there's a lot of dependencies on them. So when things break, you're like, what's the focus for that particular component? With SharePoint Online,
DNS.
The story's a lot.
It's DNS. It's always DNS.
It's always DNS. All certificates.
Yeah. They expire, right?
But the story changes, doesn't it? So the one thing that hasn't changed too much is perhaps dev test environments. So you still need to have an area where you can break things or develop things and break things without production. So I've always recommended having more than one tenant, so that if you are developing SharePoint framework solutions or you're inviting third parties in to develop on your systems, that you have a controlled space that is completely isolated away from your production data. And then you can run through your checks.
Then it brings us to this interesting thing where you say, okay, so what if I need to replicate some of the content or apps to ensure that it's integrated or like and tested, right? So exactly, right? So there's also this aspect which on-prem, well, I mean, you could have taken copy or something like extract part of it and drop that elsewhere. In the cloud, it isn't as easy, right? Because there are so many different things, especially M365 is big. There are so many things in there.
Sure.
If you really want to test, like how do you deal with it? How do you marry the let's keep things apart with, well, we need some of that thing there?
So in one case, I think it was a long time ago, one of my first 365 implementations back in 2013, I wrote a tool that I wish I could have publicized it, but I can't. But I wrote a tool that took production data, kept all of its metadata, and replaced the binary object as it transfers to a test environment. So you get all of the metadata and all that stuff, but you don't get the content of the file. So if it was sensitive or it needed to be, scrubbed for PII and all that stuff, then that was done on the fly.
Yeah.
So that's how I've worked around those kind of scenarios. It still isn't the most efficient way of doing it.
Sure.
It is a plan, but I've always taken just enough to complete the scenario that I trying to achieve, rather than I'm just going to copy the entire environment and I've got everything. Yeah. It's not practical to do that.
And by the way, PnP PowerShell does support exporting and importing files and lists items as well. So
MMS, user profiles, Yammer, whatever you team channels.
Sure. If we start thinking the whole bigger thing, it's massive. Absolutely.
This is M365 apps, right? Like
absolutely.
You need everything, and maybe even you need something in Azure because there is a specific firewall or network set up.
Application configurations in Azure.
Yeah, exactly.
So. Do you know, a lot of the tools that I wrote back then actually predates PnP itself, and I almost kicked myself that I wish I'd contributed 5 years ago when it was birthed and when it started growing. Now that we can see where it is at the moment, you think, I wish I had jumped on the bandwagon a lot earlier, and it is a slight thing with me. I regret doing that, but I'm on it now.
Yeah.
So I'll go from now onwards and contribute where I can with whatever's needed with whatever repository.
But I guess like that is a typical thing, right? I mean, you are not the only one. I am in the same boat. I wasn't like I knew of Office AMS back then.
The first one, yeah.
Exactly. I was like, yeah, it is there. Like, what would I do with it? I have no idea. Let me do whatever I need to do. And like back then, there were PowerShell commandlets for the server side. OM built by Gary Lapointe.
Yeah,
and again, I was like, there's PowerShell, but SDS ADM kind of did whatever I needed to do. So why PowerShell? Like I was the dev, right? So I very much missed the connection to it, and which is why for years I've been building my own things, my own tool, and then I was like, hey, this PnP thing is kind of neat.
Yeah.
But it just took time. It just took time for me to click, right? I mean, and I guess that is also the reason for many folks.
And the open source model actually took ages for me to click as well. And also clients that I work with who are quite closed, because obviously government and local authorities, that kind of stuff are, we don't want to run open source tech, and they're writing Chrome, .NET Core apps, and then half your infrastructure is open source. You might as well embrace it because that's where everything's going.
Yeah.
So I've had a few hoops where a lot of the time, actually, a lot of the projects I start with SharePoint. It's like the spearhead project for modernization in general. Getting up to the latest tech and so forth. So I kind of, every challenge that I face, we lack the dev environments for it. We lack the policies in some cases, or the political side. We lack the infrastructure. So moving from on-prem to Azure IaaS.
Mm-hmm.
So the SharePoint projects tend to smash through all of those challenges, or at least battle through them, and then other projects can then face that. So I've been really fortunate actually in the breadth of variety of the projects. So as a contractor, actually gives me that kind of flexibility of sticking with the project, but once it's done, I can move on to the next one.
Right.
And that I quite enjoyed that kind of approach to things.
Yeah. Makes sense, because then they see multiple customers, multiple transition, you get different experiences as well. Some people love that, some people hate it actually.
Yes.
But again,
it
depends on a persona. So I used to do the same as well for larger customers, but then at some point it moved to the model where I was the one, whenever there was a big fire, I was the one who flew over and set down the fire, and it's like, don't burn it again, and then I'm out. So, and then they call me back again.
Don't put it on fire.
So
stop putting it on fire.
Sometimes someone has to lead the change. So
that's true. That is true.
You have to say, okay, you're doing this new thing with new tech. What the challenges we've got with this, and you work through each one, and then until you get to the end product, you don't necessarily know what all the challenges are. They're not always technological. There's a huge people element part of this, and you've got to work through that change process, find out who your early adopters are and work with them and get them on board, demo to death, that kind of stuff. And I'm happy to jump through these hoops.
But that is actually a very interesting aspect, and I guess that we could have a show by itself on it, like the people aspect of IT. Like oftentimes, whether you run project or whether you change or adoption or product or even PnP, like you can build it and hope that folks come, and they won't. Maybe they will, maybe not, right? But oftentimes it's like this people aspect of explaining, like, why would you care? Why is it? What is the benefit for you? Why would you care? How do you fit in this? Where you contribute? How can you help?
And coming back on Paul's comments related on when to start contributing on the PnP, we've done a significant change on our messaging within a past year or so, and that's by design, because also the team had to get to this right maturity level, understanding how the community works and how the open source truly can be working, and then coming up with a decisions and designs, working together with cross teams, because there's the CLI teams, there's the PowerShell team, but everybody is getting now crossed, which is really good, because then we learn from each other. And what's great to see with the PnP, by the way, is that the things are now growing as an individual themes here and there. Like the PnP PowerShell team is now getting truly on off the ground and starting doing stuff together with great people like you, Paul. So, and there was quite a few other people on the recent call as well. So really cool to see that. So if only we would have time. Well, that's how we scale, obviously. But it would be so much fun to be able to join on all of those things. I wasn't there on that call, but anyway. So.
Well, but I mean that it only means
24 hours in a day.
Well, yes, I mean, and it only proves the point that maybe we need to scale even more. Maybe we need to grow even more, because there are so many. Like the other day, we would talk about, so I made a while back a mind map of everything. Well, I mean, or at least a shot at everything that we do at PnP, and it was a lot. And apparently, I even missed a few things. But it's so massive because it spans from this show even to everything like PowerShell CLI and whatnot. including docs, and you have all spectrum of like non-developer things even now, and webcasts to training videos, training material, official docs, and tooling, and everything in between, right? So it's a lot, and it gets only more and more and more, right? So
yeah,
true.
It's inevitable the team will expand.
It has to.
The program's expanding, and I guess because it's now expanding beyond SharePoint, it's including the other services. You may develop the specialisms within those as well.
Yep.
Great to see where this goes.
Absolutely. Unlimited opportunities, at least for and if there's anybody who's watching this or listening to this, reach out, and there's plenty of stuff to be done.
Call 0900, join PnP.
No, but the whole point and the whole mentality is let's build stuff together rather than building competing stuff, building stuff together and giving credits for every single one who's actually being involved. That's the fundamental thing. So everybody feels that they actually get valued on their contributions. So,
do you know, there's another really important thing actually that PnP does as a side effect is networking. So I found that my own networking and knowing who people are in the community to actually contribute something, and then people start interacting with you, trying to understand what you're doing, and then that's grown massively. So I'm rubbish at networking. I'm keeping
Trust me, I am as well.
It's just one of those things. I'm just I know my limits, and networking is not my strongest point. But since contributing, actually putting code on there and doing something for the community has actually changed the way I interact with people, and that's I think is a huge plus. It's not just about the tech now. It's almost becoming a huge family in a lot of ways.
Once again, the human side of IT. So
there you have it.
It is actually super important. I think Anna Chu and Tracy and many others are pushing on the human side of IT a lot, which is a great thing because people need to understand every single one of us are just human beings, normal humans, communicate differently. I'm an introvert, as an example. People wouldn't know this. Waldek knows this really well because I've basically avoided people since 2075. So
professionally avoiding people.
Exactly. But it's one of those things where, as a consultant or as a social media person, it doesn't necessarily
show.
It's not necessarily visible. AC is a good example as well. Andrew Connells is a good example. He's a massive introvert. Sorry, AC, for calling you out, but he knows this and he's been pretty open on it as well. But it's one of these things where we have different perceptions of people, but then when we get to know the people, wow, that's interesting. It wasn't at all what I was expecting.
Yeah.
So.
And also I find that open source is really like the unique way for you to work together with anybody, right? Because like as we say, right? Like you have a day job, and that means you work for a company or you work in the UK, the Netherlands, and you get to work with customers, companies, and whatnot. So that is like really bound. So you don't always get to choose the colleagues you have. But then you have this open sourcing where if you look up to someone, if you find like, wow, that guy is clever, well, open source is the way for you to learn from that person. Submit PR, and maybe that person, if that person is not nice because there are folks, well, then you will get burned, and you will learn like, well, that is still, even though I thought there was an idol, well, it isn't. It's just a person, and maybe he had a rough day or whatever. But more than often, you will come across a person who is willing to help.
Yeah.
And you will learn, and you will get a chance to work with whomever you want to across the world.
Yeah.
So like there is no longer.
Bert Janssen being a good example on the modernization tooling in your case. So absolutely brilliant guy. I worked with Bert on the PnP side since the birth of PnP. So back in 2013, which is quite horrifying. But anyway.
7 years and counting.
Yes. Well, at least the mentality of what we're doing right now started from there. Anyway, should we do some, rather than talk about dinosaur stuff, let's move to
reminisce,
articles. Right? Exactly. Let's talk about the articles, come back on the video screens after that. So let me share my screen. And let's
what have you found in the community?
What have we found in the community? Okay, so the big announcements of last week, we had quite a few things.
Drum roll.
ending was this one, the .NET standard version of SharePoint Online CSM APIs. Really, really cool thing. A lot of attention on this one. Obviously, it unblocks people to write .NET Core, and they can take advantage of this stuff in Azure Functions, V2, V3, and all of that
Docker
stuff.
containers.
Dockers, containers. We can do PowerShell Core now. We're kind of basically finally unblocked on catching up on where the rest of the .NET community already went. So
realities of life. You cannot do everything, right?
Yeah, it's I can't share all of the details, but it's a pretty sad story why we didn't actually do this earlier. But now it's there, so let's be positive on that.
That is the most important thing, yeah.
So the one thing maybe to call out on this one is that the on-premises version is not at least yet available. So we do have a user voice entry on that one. So let's collect the entries on that one if that's impactful for SharePoint 2019 as an example, or SharePoint 2016. Now, I can't promise that that will happen, but more votes will obviously always raise the user voice entry in higher, and the higher it is, the more visible it is in the internal reviews as well. So. Good. Other ones, what happens last week? So this one was pretty cool as well. Video training package for Microsoft Teams Yeoman Generator. This is around the Yo teams. There's quite a few different teams, tooling and generators which are available. So the new one, which was introduced in build, is in preview, and it still needs to evolve here and there around the Visual Studio extensions and Visual Studio Online EDE. And we'll definitely do a video series on that one whenever the time is right as well. But the Yo teams has existed for quite a long time already, and there's actually nice to see the 8 people actually delivering videos for it, and really just kind of a getting started level of things, which is definitely more and more our focus areas as well. Now, Paul, on your feedback on this one, so at some point we realized that we started doing way too technically detailed videos, and now we're trying to focus on getting started. What do you think about that perspective? Because at least from my side, it's one of those things where it started seeing like, hey, we're living in a bubble. It's not like the rest of the world want to have these super detailed technical videos. They want to have basics.
I haven't actually touched the Yeoman Generator for Teams yet, so this is a great entry point for myself. I guess I'm still stuck in C# land, so but I am
come to the dark side
to learn Teams, and
No,
so this is an awesome series, actually. I would look forward to watching this.
And you can certainly stay in the C# world as well. That's not the point. And people can do both. It's not either or. So now this one, the next one, announcing SharePoint Starter Kit v2, actually surprisingly a lot attention as well. So this is really cool. Also MVP setup. So we had quite a few MVPs involved on this one, the V2 release. This one, unfortunately, got quite a significantly delayed. It was initially planned to get out on, I think, February timeframe, but then there was technical complications, delays, and all of that stuff, and we finally got it out, and then last week. What's really cool about this one is that many of these web parts, which, well, first of all, they're using Microsoft Craft Toolkit, they're using Microsoft Craft. A lot of them work as a Microsoft Teams tabs as well, and if needed, some of them actually also work for SharePoint 2019. So you can actually take an individual web part. So as an example, whatever reasons, people seem to love to have the latest emails in the front page of their intranets. You can just take that web part and install that to your tenant, and poof, not the 25 web parts, only the one. So I think it's really nice.
There was a component I used from this in one of my projects, the redirection function. So when you move intranets from on-prem to online, a lot of the URLs break in, say, documents, or if you've got a repository and stuff. And so I actually used a component from this as a base to redirect from the old URLs to the new ones, and it was pretty smooth. It was pretty good.
Absolutely, and that's definitely the intention of this one. This is not intended to be used necessarily as it is, rather as a innovation, as a inspiration for and an example code for, oh, this is how I can do this. Awesome. And then modify the code and ship it as your own thing, and hopefully make millions out of it. So, right?
Not quite there yet.
One step at a time. Penny is a start for a million, or whatever it is saying. Now, a lap around the Microsoft Graph Toolkit day 10. I think we have actually day 11. Microsoft Graph Toolkit Teams provider. So really around the Teams provider for Microsoft Graph Toolkit, getting access on things, how to use that. Really nice article, clean setup, and how to get access on things. What's really cool about this one as well is that the graph around toolkits are being written by our MVPs. So in this case, Simon Ogren. So I think it's the right way how we are seeing more and more engagement with MVPs across multiple areas. Lap around Microsoft Graph Toolkit day 11. Microsoft Graph Toolkit proxy provider from Ashit Trivedi as well. And talking about the fact that if you build your own provider and then you provide the needed data and then integrate that to the Graph Toolkit. So really cool stuff as well. So really nice. Announcing general availability of Microsoft Graph Identity Protection APIs, so new APIs for Microsoft Graph, which is right, of course, the intention. You'll see more and more APIs in the future in Microsoft Graph as well. It is the one API to rule them all. I think we're finally getting there, by the way. It's been the saying for quite a few years, but now I think it's fair to say that there's humongous amount of APIs in Microsoft Graph.
Yes.
So
yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, it depends a lot, like what you want to, like the app you build. What is
Absolutely.
it supposed to do, right? So, for majority of things, Graph is more than enough. Sure, there might be a few bits and pieces, like if you need to create content types or fields, are they in Graph? Not really, right? So maybe for these few specific things, you would have a fallback, but for everything else, Graph is more than enough.
Yep, and obviously for all of the new services, all of the APIs are just being provided through Graph. There's no alternative APIs,
like
which is the right thing to do. It's like Teams.
Yeah.
Teams is a good example. SharePoint has that legacy to almost 20 years of history, which is one of the reasons why it's slightly an exception on this rule. Yeah. Now, Office 365 CLI had a new version, 2.11. Do you want to talk about this one, Waldek?
Yeah, sure.
Just to call out the changes.
So, new version with a number of improvements. We have improved the ability to upgrade SPFX project from one version to another. We extended creating teams with supports for templates. And then also another addition that we have is the ability to remove fields from a group, right? So if you want to clean up a site and you want to remove all fields from a given group, you can do it in single go, as opposed to have to enumerate all fields, check their group, and so forth and so on. We also set the first step towards renaming the Office 365 CLI to Microsoft 365 CLI to align more with marketing. So from version 2.11, you can start CLI by typing Microsoft 365 or M365 for short.
Yep.
So that's coming.
Yep. Really cool.
Nice.
And then this one from last week, apparently on Thursday, written by me. Wow. So updates on my updates on the Microsoft 365 community docs. So on the non-dev side of the house, driven by the Mark D. Anderson. So just a summary on the new articles which have happened since we released an initiative, and updated articles, and the new contributors and prior contributors as well. So, and the M365 community docs is really around the fact that we want to build real-world stories and documentation from the community for the community, rather than people in Redmond offices not necessarily knowing the real world, writing guidance, which is not necessarily true. In some cases it is true, some cases it isn't, but it's good to have this location.
Well, I think there is a difference, right? Because, and I think two points that are their perspectives are valid, right? Because the one is in Redmond, what we get is how the product was designed to be used.
Yeah, intended
right?
to be used. Yeah, absolutely.
Versus how, like, what are the needs in the field, and how can you make these intended features to work in practice for these things, right? So I think that there is value in having them both.
Absolutely, and to be honest, in the long run, the initiative is we're thinking on how can we combine this with the real docs and all of that stuff. But we need to start with
somewhere
showing the demand and getting started on collecting articles and stories in one location. And maybe at some point we'll merge things and do shuffling and all of that. But hey, let's see, one step at a time. As long as you're heading to the right direction roughly, and then you can adjust your thing. I've never been a big fan of what are you going to do in 5 years. Well, I have no idea. but I'm heading to this direction. I think this direction is correct. So I have no idea what I did last week, so don't ask me.
It was March. It was March. Don't worry.
Okay, so from AC, SharePoint Framework Summer 2020 wish list, and this is good call out from JC on areas where we should be improving on a SharePoint Framework, and I can openly say that we have acknowledged a lot of these areas and certainly are fixing areas and the bugs on this side as well. So as an example, improving the list and library experience is Microsoft Teams SPFX integration should be finalized. There has been some not reliable behaviors related on mobile or a desktop behavior, and all of that has to be properly documented so people know how to make things happen, and also make sure that they are working 100%. No follow through on SPFX extensions. This is really around calling out, for example, the field editing experience. We don't support that yet. We're looking into that one. Can't promise a timeline on that. Again, matter of priorities, to be honest. But thank you for pushing these things, because obviously these kind of articles are really good because it's constructive feedback. It's not basically calling it's not a negative toned, it's basically constructive. These are the things which you should be improving, and sure,
and here is why, and here is why.
Yeah. Basically explaining the reasoning behind it. It shows also the demand from the community, rather than saying Microsoft is the bad, Microsoft doesn't get it, and that's not constructive. So rather work together.
Exactly.
Enable and unblock using SPFX grading custom forms. This is now, I think, number 2 in our list. So in the user was.
This one has been on the wall for a long time.
Yeah.
It almost seems like the holy grail, right? Like you need to have data entry. In order to have data in lists, you have to be able to enter them. So
yeah, you might argue that there's power apps for it if you need to customize the list experiences. So do we need to have an alternative ways of doing that, such as pro dev?
Options are good.
And sure. And now on the other articles, so overview on Microsoft Graph Open Extensions and Schema Extension. Yaya Kumar writing a blog post on that one. So how can you extend stuff? How does that actually work on? Microsoft Teams app Yeoman Generator, split nrock and serve. You need to be pretty familiar with what actually nrock serve means and what is Microsoft Teams app generator for actually understanding this. But in short, whenever you run nrock serve, what happens behind the scenes is that the Yeoman generator starts nrock, it generates the manifests, it's packaged the manifest, match the URL to the nrock URL, and then it's ready to go and it serves the stuff from locally. And that basically means that you need to re-upload the manifests to the teams so that the association between the local dev box works. And basically what Marcus is explaining here is how do you bypass that need of a resubmitting the manifest, because the nrock URL
once a day.
Yes, exactly. So,
and I mean, you can avoid all of that if you have a paid account, nrock account.
Sure.
Right, because because that is the limit that they have. If you use a free account, which is already awesome that the ability is there.
Yeah.
Well, the consequence of that is that every time you start it, you will get a new URL. Period.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting related on this one, I have to ask that. Well, why are we talking about Microsoft Teams Yeoman Generator? What about SharePoint Framework targeting for Microsoft Teams? Let's come back on the same conclusion as previous articles.
You cannot build bots in SPFX.
And you cannot build bots with SPFX. You can build tabs, you can build personal applications, and pretty soon task module, the UX side of the bots. No.
Plus, maybe you have a need to expose an existing app. So imagine you have built a spa, or you have different app that you already have.
But it's a spa rather than just swimming and in shower.
Single page app, right? So imagine that you have existing app, whatever shape it is, and you want to expose that in Teams. You wouldn't rebuild it from scratch in SPFX. Instead, you will expose that, and this is the way to go.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, Warhaman had a really nice clarification on using .NET Standard CSAM, the one which we announced last week with the MSAL.NET for app-only author in SharePoint Online. So Warhaman works for Wallow Intranet, and I know that he's building automation on this side, so they needed to figure it out. So thank you, Warhaman, for explaining how to use it and explaining.
We need to have it in the docs.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should, have it in the docs as well. That's fair. That is fair. Good. Paolo, our Italian friend, had a new YouTube video, team staffs with Yeoman generators. A lot of teams focused this time, actually, which is not bad at all. Definitely a big investment area for Microsoft. But basically creating team staffs with the Yeoman generator for Microsoft Teams. Again, you could use SharePoint Framework if you're more familiar with that one as an example. Or you can use Surface or existing application like Waldek said. Now, 4 more. Implementing Microsoft Graph Teams authentication flow for tabs. And we actually reviewed this one just before we started recording from Ramin. And we're like, well, what are we doing? But then if you scroll down, all the way down, you actually understand what we're doing here. We're basically building a SharePoint Framework web part which authenticates against Box. And then you can absolutely surface that also in the Microsoft Teams. It doesn't really matter, is it actually surfaced as a SharePoint web application or a web part, or as a tab in the Microsoft Teams. And this is basically then making it available for you to do or to against the Box sign-in. So cool setup. Chris Johnson published a verification of Azure IAD apps. Basically, you want to have yourself verified and how to make this happen. Unless I'm completely mistaken, this is still a free service from Microsoft, actually, for those applications which are signing up. So really cool setup. And they're targeting now not only Microsoft Teams applications and providers, but also other areas as well. So they're looking into other ISVs to do the verification, basically, so that Microsoft says, yes, Hyperfish is the Hyperfish which they're calling them to be. That's which brings increased the trust, because you never know.
Right.
You never know. This one from Peter Winstra, SharePaints.
It's an awesome title.
Yes, but basically how to use the SharePoint migration tool. So there's a new version of the SharePoint migration tool, and that's actually getting more and more additional love all the time, or investment from our side. So there's improvements there. So really cool setup as well. And he walks through the process and how to get started, how do you use it, and all of that. So really, really cool. The migration tool itself does not, however, move pages. Right, Paul? You're a pretty specialist on this one.
Yep.
Yeah, there are gaps. Yeah. I do recommend other tools for this.
Now, if only it was open source, right? If only it was open source.
Open source tools.
Yeah. If there would be an extensibility for the migration tool in SharePoint 2013, where you could plug in your stuff, that would be actually pretty awesome.
It would,
Now that I'm saying that, maybe I should have it over. I know the PMs of this tool, so maybe I should have a discussion with them. But if they don't want to open source the whole thing, what about having an extensibility point, SDK, something in there? It's cool. And the last thing from Tracy, how to configure the new useful links web part in SharePoint Online. Good video from her explaining how to get started on using that and how does it actually work in practice. And Paul, you said that there was a long email thread related on this one, so pretty cool setup.
Yeah.
Cool. And that's all of the articles. A lot of articles this time. Been talking too much. Good. What's going to happen this week?
Paul.
What's going to happen this week?
From a contribution side, so I've put my hat in the ring for writing probably around about 400 tests for PnP PowerShell.
Yeah, and I have to say it in a recording. Yeah. Irvin was so happy. He was so happy that somebody volunteered on that.
Yeah, I think it's worth it. To be fair, I've used PnP PowerShell a lot in my career, and I've had a lot of benefit from that project. So I think it's only fair that I return something that is new. Also, I get to know the team that's there, because there's a new team that's forming with PnP PowerShell to help manage massive now. So it's crossed a major milestone with, I think it's 1 billion requests a month.
Billion requests in May. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. That is just outstanding.
Yeah. What do people do with it?
Half a billion's mine. Sorry.
And actually, it's billion exit commandlet executions, and that's the requests is much bigger because behind of a one commandlet execution, it might actually do multiple requests. So
again, what are people doing with it?
Automate scripting. Well,
Is it there yet?
CLI users are growing as well, so that's fine.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, it's not a competition, right, Waldek?
What?
So
I mean, if that's a game we'll be losing for a long time.
This is almost like an internal joke between Waldek and Erwin, and they used to work in the same company as well, where CLI against the usage compare between the PnP PowerShell and CLI.
Not even close. Whatever PnP PowerShell does in, I don't know, 10 minutes, we probably do in a month.
Yeah, it's but its CLI usage is growing as well, so it's good to see.
We have our own audience, we have our niche, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah,
it's good to use the right tool and the right purposes. So.
Absolutely.
Cool. So you're starting the unit testing creation then for this week. Sorry for interrupting you there.
No.
Pastor, you will be living in Pastor.
Yeah, it's not the sexiest thing to do, but I'll crack through that as much as I can, and I can get onto other things. I've started to contribute as well in the PnP Core SDK, if I get the right project name. I'm not so active on that one as yet, but there's some great discussions going on between Bert and Yannick and Paolo as well about what they want to do with it and what they're experimenting with as well. So I think that would be a really good project to contribute to at some point as well. And also, they're looking for contributors, so it's not a plug or anything, but it is.
If you
contribute somewhere, then go for it.
And that's C#.NET Core. So if you're all that side, people are looking contributors.
And PnP, you get to work with some of the most skilled people in the field.
Yeah, it's a good learning tool. Yeah.
True. What about you, Waldek? Anything interesting in this week?
Well, yes. So for one, I will be writing an announcement because something happened in CLI world a week or two back.
Friday?
Yeah. So CLI is now available by default as a part of the Azure Cloud Shell.
Yep.
And that is just brilliant. Like sometimes it's like I cannot wrap my head around that this happened. So it's an open source tool built by community, available a part of Azure, the Microsoft Cloud.
Default, default. Yeah.
Exactly. It's unbelievable. But it is really cool. So we will be announcing that officially. If all is well, by the time you watch the video, the announcement is available. If I did my work. Yeah. And then other than that, we have a bunch of improvements in CLI side. Still PRs open, new issues open. So the work keeps going on. We'll be releasing videos that help you understand how to work with CLI. What are the different aspects to it? So again, going back to basics.
Getting started.
Intro content. Exactly. Yes. Because we realize, as you said Vesa, that with anything really, there are more novices than experts in every single field. There's new people starting with things every day, and we just we live and breathe this for 3 years now. We very much know it at the back of our hand. Well, everybody else does not. They have their own jobs, their own things to do. They come, use it, and go, and it's perfectly fine. And it's our job to help them be effective with that.
Absolutely.
I quite often bump into to many people that have never heard of PnP.
Still.
PnP even,
SharePoint Farms or SharePoint Online. Yeah. What's PnP?
But it's one of those things which is on that particular topic. It's completely understandable because most of the people are not in Twitter. most of the people are not in social media. Most of the people do not read or subscribe, let's say, developer news, emails, subscriptions. So they basically learn the things when they run into it as a colleague or somebody else shows the story.
Also, maybe there is something like, like a blast from the past to kind of revamp the whole idea. Like in the past, Microsoft would send every month, every quarter, you would get this new set of DVDs. MSD and DVDs.
Yeah. Yes.
Maybe we need to have a written form PnP newsletter that we will send to partners, to companies, basically on their mail address.
A physical letter, actually sending something.
A newsletter, yes, like
yes,
a quarterly update. Yes, exactly. Well, it's a joke, but I wonder to what degree that would help us to reach new audience that we don't reach otherwise.
Sure. But that's been an interesting discussion point for many years, Paul, what we were saying, that how do we reach for the people? How do we let people know that they can benefit out of the open source initiatives, and there's tooling which they can learn to be more efficient and increase their productivity, because it's beneficial for them to know that this stuff is available. But it's one of those things that it's perfectly normal to be interested on work-related topics 8 hours in a day, not being active in community. That's the normal way of working in IT. But how do we let these people know what do we have and how they can benefit out of it? It's an interesting challenge. So
it's also another point that I try to bash, actually, where I hear it, is that there is a perception that PnP is for the bleeding edge of technology, and there's a whole variety and a whole set of repositories that span quite far back, and PnP is not just about the latest and greatest. There are plenty of components there that work with on-prem SharePoint or anything like that. So
yeah, absolutely. Now
on your end, Vesa, what's going on your end?
I'm just watching a Teams message coming from AC. What he's asking? No, never mind. And,
you just mentioned me on the show. How dare you? How would he know?
How did you know? So on my side, I think it's more on catching up on things. So we had quite a few releases last week. Then we have quite a few interesting videos coming up this week as well. I'm building on a internal telemetry dashboards, understanding provisioning more efficiently and all of that. So interesting stuff, but nothing really super, let's say, open for the community this week. So of course,
it's coming. It's coming. New things are coming.
New stuff on the works. Absolutely. So, but last week, see some .NET standards. So that was now it's out finally. So that's good. I think that's it now. Thank you, Paul, for joining us. Awesome discussion.
Thank you, Paul.
We'll definitely invite you here in a while, or else we'll try to keep like 50 episodes before we do all this stuff.
And we do count, not really.
Yeah, no, we don't. but thank you for joining us, and thank you for telling your story and how to get started on the community, because I think that's really, really important as well. So people understand that it's really about going above the let's say the risk, or don't feel too intimidated on getting started. Reaching out and asking is perfectly fine. And then if people are not actually immediately answering your question or answering your ask, don't get offended on it. Do it again in 2 weeks. Do it again in 3 weeks. It's one of those things. It might be we're human beings, like we discussed as well. Every now and then the question might come in a wrong timeline. So.
Well, and also I think that for a part, it's also on our end to ensure that all projects are more welcoming, that there is a specific area for new people who want to help, who don't know the way around it, who just start, I think there's also some work for us to do on that. And so basically to have a balance, right? Because on one hand, yes, it's like if you are new, like we don't know everybody in the world. So if you are new and you want to help, you need to set the first step. You need to let everyone know, hey, I want to help. But then on the other hand, we need to ensure that it's a safe space. You will not be, you will not feel like idiot because you say like, hey, how do I do PR here, right? So
I don't think we never, well, at least knowingly said that for anybody, because that's not.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's like.
But again, it's a perception.
It's how
as well,
you feel, right?
Yes,
it's
exactly,
how you feel, right? So it's more about that us calling explicitly somebody, because like that wouldn't be okay.
Yeah, definitely.
If I had a word to those people that are on that precipice, take that leap, because it's worth it. It really is worth it.
Cool. That was a great message to stop this one. So thank you everybody for watching or listening, depending on your preference. And we'll be back with the new PnP Weekly within a week. Thank you. See you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.